two passages I'd like to read to you. So I've done a number of these, and people always ask, what is the book about? And I guess the shorthand is it's the book about, a story about two mothers, one Korean, the other African American, whose son and daughter were husband and wife, and the son and daughter are murdered. And it's a story about their grief. And for the Korean mom, her grief is complicated because she had been estranged from her daughter because she had married somebody who was African American. The second story, in my mind, of the book is a story about mothers and daughters and the vastly complicated relationships that coupling can bring. And then the third story is a story about women of a certain generation, a woman of a certain cultural period, women who may or may not have benefited from the feminist movement, whether it was cultural, whether it was socioeconomic, whether it was just personal. So those are the three, for me, the three stories that sort of define the book. So the first passage I'd like to read to you is, as the title suggests, there's not a bucket of hope, but there's a little bit of hope in the book. And Mrs. Park, who teaches, she's an accomplished pianist, and she teaches music appreciation at a community college. This is a moment where she can finally see the potential of her life beyond this sort of, unthinkable thing that happens in her life, by forming this unusual friendship with a student of hers. So that's what I would like to read. Hold on. 2 days later, she sat in her office again, biding time, but hugely relieved to be here rather than at home. Her sense of responsibility demanded that she be there during her office hours, despite the fact no student ever showed up, even to complain about her tougher grading this semester. She opened her top desk drawer, sorting out old pens, tossing those with dried ink. The small boom box she used for her classes played an Aretha Franklin album, another one of Jane's CDs she had brought from home. She loved the phrasing, the looseness of the singer's approach to the lyrics, forever coming in just under the beat. She hummed along with the now familiar refrain. A tentative knock made her stop her humming in mid-note. Instead of asking whoever was behind the door to come in, she got up to open it herself. Half expecting to see one of her colleagues, she opened the door just enough to invite polite conversation, and was unable to hide her surprise in seeing Tanya, who stood, books to her chest, as if she were shielding herself from whatever onslaught was surely going to be directed at her. "Tanya, what a surprise. Come in," she said, opening the door wider, stepping aside to let the young girl in. "I was wondering if I can see you're busy," Tanya stammered. Mrs. Park remembered that she had promised to open her classroom door for her. She noticed the stack of sheet music Tanya was clutching to her chest, the protective stance betraying her shyness and vulnerability. Mrs. Park fought her curiosity to see what Tanya had chosen to practice. Some people snooped around people's bookshelves, the titles more revealing about a person than all the personal stories and revelations. For Mrs. Park, the music they played, or better yet, listened to, revealed as much about a person, sometimes an album, revealing a secretly held desire. "It's Wednesday. I'm sorry, let me just grab my key and I'll open the classroom for you," she said, rushing to her desk drawer for the ring, which held an assortment of keys to her office, classroom, faculty lounge, and mailroom. "It's okay if you're too busy, I understand." Mrs. Park replied she was hardly busy since no one ever showed up for office hours. She even flung her arms over her desk, which exposed her idleness of the past hour. With her keys in hand, she and Tanya headed toward the empty classroom and the awaiting piano. Mrs. Park's pleasure with Tanya for taking her up on her casual invitation surprised her. With the lights flicked on, she turned to go, leaving Tanya alone to her music, but then paused to assure Tanya that she could stay as long as she wanted. "The classroom will be empty," she explained. Tanya stood between Mrs. Park and the piano, still clutching her music. "I live with my aunt right now, and she doesn't have a piano," Tanya said. explanation for an unasked question. My mom, she's away, drugs. Afraid of what other confessions Tanya would reveal about the struggles in her life, Mrs. Park turned to sit at the piano playing a C chord. She patted the bench, inviting Tanya to sit down and play. Would you play something, Mrs. Park? Tanya asked shyly. Not wanting to disappoint her, Mrs. Park warmed up by playing some scales, letting her fingers reacquaint themselves with the ingrained positions. Fingers extended, wrist held up. She played the undulating notes of the Adagio sostenuto of Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 14, the Moonlight Sonata. Her fingers retracing the familiar ostinato triplet rhythm, her right hand picking out the haunting melody. Her mind filled with the picture of her husband as a young man sitting next to her, she played this piece for him. Although their bodies barely touched, tension crackled between them, making Mrs. Park acutely aware of his presence as her fingers felt their way to chords long memorized. She tried to control her fingering to play in pianissimo that Beethoven had expressly directed, her focus distracted by the musky scent of his aftershave. The lamentation of the melody seemed to fill in the unspoken words rarely expressed between a Korean man and Korean woman, finally given an arena for experience and expression. Whenever she'd sit down to play, something she did frequently in the beginning of their marriage, she would eventually end up playing this piece, in essence, performing for him. With the many disappointments she experienced during the course of her marriage, she stopped playing for him, but instead played to express the music's moaning for the unattainable, now her own moaning. As the music built, imploring in each progression, Mrs. Park tried to imagine Dr. Park's embarrassment if he were to walk in on this intimate performance. Would his surprise and predictable blundering make Tanya feel ill at ease, as if she and Mrs. Park had been doing something illicit? Her anger bubbled quickly to the surface, making her foot pump harder in the pedal, caring not a whit for Beethoven's dictate for pianissimo. Her eyes watered, her body taut with rage and grief. Pulled under by the toe, all her emotion, she played with intensity and abandon, almost as an apology. All of her melancholy and passion married the music's grave, meditative melody directed her fingers to hit a note louder, to linger on a key for longer than was customary. To her trained ear, her playing sounded theatrical, the mezzo forte sounding more forte, her right hand fingering almost sloppy, her technique all but abandoned. She played as a young lover begging his beloved, his plea one long sonorous cry of anguish and yearning. Her right hand climbed the progression of notes like a lover climbing the stairs to his desire above, her eyes closed. As the music made its descent, she pictured young love thwarted, each step down the sweeping staircase a resignation to what can never be. Her closed eyes were moist, preventing her from looking up after the piano had quieted and her hands remained still in the ready position. Beethoven? Tanya asked timidly. Mrs. Park felt depleted and could only reply that it was. She got up from the piano bench and asked Tanya to play something. Tanya approached the bench shyly, her sheet music again clasped to her chest. Her vulnerability made Mrs. Park wish she had just left instead of allowing each of them to reveal themselves in such an intimate manner. Desperate that music filled the room, Mrs. Park encouraged her again. It doesn't matter what, play anything. Tanya sat down and, humming ever so slightly under her breath, played a pop song that Mrs. Park vaguely remembered. Something in the tilt to her head and the comfortable way her long fingers looked reaching across the keyboard brought a pang to Mrs. Park's chest for all the obstacles in the way of this young girl's fulfillment. While she was playing, Tanya was not an invisible person, a body merely filling a seat, her future certain to be uncertain. Instead, the music and the act of playing transformed her, making her seem more her age with all the hope of someone with the road of her life still untarnished by the wreckage of disappointment and failure. Tanya kept her eyes closed, humming quietly underneath the melody drifting from the piano. Mrs. Park's eyes became moist again, moved not by pity for this young girl, but by the openness and invitation of this moment. Tanya, who should have been embarrassed or at the least uncomfortable by such an intimate exchange, seemed to be opening a secret box holding all generosity moved her more than the most eloquent expression of sympathy and forgiveness. For the briefest moment, Mrs. Park found herself able to look forward to the emptiness of her life without the breath being sucked out of her. Too quickly, the music came to an end. The addictive melody of the refrain filed in Mrs. Park's personal jukebox of collected melodies, phrases, and chords. "That's very good, Tanya," Mrs. Park said, her words heartfelt. "You play very well.